Have you noticed that the more you chase happiness, the further it drifts from reach? It's as if the moment you try to hold it, it turns to smoke soft, warm, and gone. You live in a world that gives you everything: infinite information, endless entertainment, and tools to improve every aspect of your life. And yet, deep down, there's a quiet unease. You feel it between your scrolling thumb and your restless thoughts. The sense that something vital is missing, that despite all your access, you've somehow lost touch with what it means to simply exist. You wake up, and before your mind even greets the morning, it's already reaching for stimulation, the glow of a screen, a notification, a thought that says you're behind. You consume data the way the starving consume crumbs. But no matter how much you take in, it never fills you. Because your brain, that ancient, brilliant organ, wasn't designed for this. It evolved to notice danger, to protect you from predators, to seek meaning in patterns and connections. Now it's trapped in a labyrinth of noise, wired to survive a world that no longer resembles the one it was built for. You're not lazy, you're overloaded, you're not empty, you're saturated, like a cup already full. Every drop of new information spills over, leaving you feeling scattered and shallow. You scroll through joy, not to feel it, but to borrow its image. You seek knowledge, not for wisdom, but for a momentary hit of superiority. You chase connection, but in the glow of screens, no one's eyes ever meet yours. And so you begin to wonder, if happiness is everywhere, why does it always feel like it's happening somewhere else? Psychology calls this the hedonic treadmill, the endless cycle of wanting, achieving, and wanting. Again, neuroscience calls it dopamine depletion, the overuse of reward pathways until even pleasure feels numb. Philosophy, though, might call it a spiritual famine, the hunger that comes from mistaking noise for nourishment. You've been taught that becoming happier, healthier, and smarter means adding more habits, more hacks, more knowledge. But what if the answer is subtraction? What if clarity begins when you stop feeding on noise? What if health is found not in constant doing, but in the sacred art of being? This isn't about rejecting the modern world. It's about remembering the rhythm beneath it, the slower, quieter intelligence of a mind at peace. Because true fulfillment was never lost in the chaos. It was simply drowned out by it. And if you listen carefully in the silence between notifications, in the breath before the next thought, you might hear it calling you back. A return not to more, but to less. Not to the future, but to presence. And that is where the journey truly begins. There's a moment in every childhood when love quietly turns into a transaction and you don't even notice it happening. Maybe it began with a gold star on your homework, or the way your parents smiled when you did something good. You learned, without words, that approval was the currency of safety, that to be loved, you had to perform. And from that moment on, your nervous system began its lifelong apprenticeship, not in joy, but in earning it. You were praised for your grades, not your curiosity, rewarded for silence, not for honesty. When you cried, someone told you to stop. When you succeeded, someone clapped. And so, your young brain, flexible, hungry, absorbing everything, began wiring itself around one core equation. If I do well, I am worthy. If I rest, I disappear. Neuroscience calls this conditioning the process by which the brain learns through reinforcement. But in psychology, it's far more intimate. It's the architecture of your attachment, the emotional blueprint that decides how you'll love, fear, and belong for the rest of your life. Some children developed secure attachment. They were seen, soothed, safe. But others, the anxious ones, learned to chase love that ran. And the avoidant ones, they learned to shrink from it altogether. Whichever pattern took root, the result was the same: Love became labor. By adolescence, the seeds had already grown into identities. The pleaser emerged fluent in smiles and apologies, allergic to conflict. The achiever appeared addicted to success, terrified of stillness. And the observer, quiet, detached, always watching life from behind a glass wall, too afraid to need anything at all. Each of them learned the same secret rule: don't be too much, don't be too little, just be what keeps you safe. It's tragic how early the mask becomes natural. You forget what unfiltered laughter feels like. You forget how to play without purpose. You forget that existing, by itself, was once enough. Every neuron, every behavior, every belief begins orbiting the same hidden sun approval. But this isn't your fault. It's the inheritance of a society that mistakes productivity for purpose and obedience for love. Your parents didn't know they were passing down a program. They were simply running their own. They too were children once praised for being good, punished for being real. And so the cycle continued. Somewhere along the way, you began to confuse being noticed with being known. But attention is not affection. Validation is not love. And performing wellness is not the same as being well. You didn't grow up learning how to feel alive. You learned how to survive attention. And that's why adulthood feels like a performance you never auditioned for. At some point, you grew up, or at least, you were told you did. You entered a world that rewards polished faces and measurable outcomes. You learned to smile when you didn't want to look confident when you felt lost, to speak of growth and balance as though you'd mastered them. You became fluent in pretending. And the strange part is, everyone else did too. You wear the mask so often that it begins to feel like skin. You post a picture of joy instead of feeling it. You talk about mindfulness, but only after checking how it looks in your feed. You chase goals not because they fulfill you, but because standing still feels dangerous, like failure might catch up if you stop running. So you keep running. You work, you optimize, you plan. You call it discipline, but sometimes it's just fear. Fear of being irrelevant, fear of being unseen, fear of yourself. Modern life has turned ambition into anesthesia. The meetings, the screens, the self-improvement rituals, they fill the silence that might otherwise reveal how numb you've become. You meditate because you should, not because you can feel your own breath. You read not to understand, but to accumulate. Even love becomes performance, dates that feel like interviews, affection that feels like negotiation. It's a haunting irony. You do all the right things, yet something inside still feels hollow. You eat well, you journal, you exercise, but your soul is malnourished. Because no matter how much you achieve, it never quiets that small, unseen voice asking, "Is this it?" Psychologists call this conditional self-worth, the belief that you must constantly prove your right to exist. Neuroscience might describe it as the brain's addiction to reward loops, dopamine spikes from likes, promotions, and praise that fade faster each time. But philosophically, it's something older, a mind that's lost its center, orbiting endlessly around everything it thinks it needs to be complete. You've mistaken activity for meaning. You confuse stimulation with aliveness. You build routines so rigid that even your healing becomes another form of control. It's not the effort that's wrong, it's the engine beneath it. Because you're still running the same program you inherited as a child. I must do something to be someone. And so, beneath the mask of progress, the same old fear hides the fear of stopping, the fear of silence, the fear of meeting the self without a script. You've built an entire identity around appearing whole, yet the cracks only widen with each new attempt to fix them. The truth is, there was never anything wrong with you that performance could cure. But you'll only understand that when the mask finally grows too heavy to hold. And in that moment, when it slips, the real transformation begins. Your brain is not just an organ, it's an economy. Every thought, every emotion, every spark of curiosity costs energy, and like any economy, it can thrive or collapse depending on what you spend it on. The tragedy of modern life is not that you lack intelligence, but that your intelligence is constantly taxed, drained by 1,000 small transactions of distraction, worry, and noise. You wake up each morning with a limited balance of focus, yet most of it is spent before you even begin to live. Neuroscience calls this the dopamine loop. Each notification, each scroll, each unfinished to-do sends a small surge of anticipation through your reward system. It feels good for a moment, the illusion of progress, but like an economy built on debt, every high comes with a hidden cost. The more you chase novelty, the more your brain's baseline for pleasure rises. What once felt satisfying becomes ordinary. What once calmed you now barely registers. You become a slave to stimulation, needing more and more to feel less and less. Then there's cortisol, the body's silent accountant. It measures every threat, every uncertainty, every emotional imbalance. When stress becomes chronic, cortisol floods your system, dulling the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for focus, empathy, and reason. Under its weight, clarity collapses. You can no longer think deeply because your body believes it's still, fighting to survive. Anxiety, then, isn't a personal flaw. It's the signal of a nervous system drowning in overdraft. But here's where science reveals something profound. The same brain that can be hijacked by chaos can also be rewired by calm. This is the miracle of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt, to change its structure through consistent experience. When you slow down, when you breathe with awareness, when you choose presence over impulse, you are literally reshaping the architecture of your mind. The neural pathways that once fed anxiety begin to wither, and those linked to clarity and peace start to bloom. Researchers studying the default mode network, the system active when your mind wanders, found that overactivity in this network correlates with depression, rumination, and mental fatigue. Yet, when subjects practiced mindfulness, the same network quieted. Their brains learned stillness. Their thoughts moved like clouds forming, dissolving without attachment. The lesson was simple yet profound. Happiness and intelligence are not born from more input, but from better regulation. Cognitive scientists call it load theory. Your brain has a finite capacity for processing. When overloaded, performance declines across everything: memory, emotion, and judgment. But when regulated, when your inner economy is balanced, something beautiful happens. Thought becomes sharper, emotion becomes softer, awareness becomes whole. You realize then that wisdom is not a product of accumulation, but alignment. The smartest brain is not the one most informed, it's the one least disturbed. And that truth leads you toward the next realization, that peace itself might be the highest form of intelligence. There's a strange cruelty hidden inside the pursuit of becoming better. At first, it feels noble, the decision to improve, to evolve, to shed old skin. You begin climbing the staircase of self-mastery, believing that just one more step will take you closer to peace. But the staircase doesn't end. Each goal achieved reveals another. Each flaw healed exposes a deeper wound. You don't notice at first, but somewhere along the way, growth stops feeling like liberation and starts feeling like punishment. You wake up every day, measuring your worth in progress. You count your steps, your habits, your achievements, your failures. You compare yourself to others who seem to be climbing faster. You read, meditate, journal, yet feel more anxious, more fragmented, more lost. The irony is haunting. The more you try to fix yourself, the more broken you feel. Like a person polishing a mirror that keeps cracking, you begin to wonder if the cracks were the mirror's true beauty all along. This is the shadow side of self-optimization, when growth becomes an obsession, when productivity replaces presence, when the search for happiness becomes the very source of suffering. You wear your wellness like armor, hiding exhaustion behind words like discipline and grind. You speak of alignment while secretly chasing validation. Even your rest becomes performative, your silence filled with guilt. You don't rest because you've earned it. You rest so you can work harder tomorrow. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress because they don't fit the image we want to show the world. The anger you suppress in the name of calm, the envy you disguise as ambition, the grief you bury under smiles, all of it hides in that dark mirror of your mind. You spend years fighting it, convinced that to be whole means to destroy what's bad inside you. But the more you exile your darkness, the stronger it becomes. The more you chase light, the longer your shadow grows behind you. The truth is, your shadow was never your enemy. It was your map. It contains everything you've abandoned: your wildness, your depth, your capacity to feel. When you stop trying to conquer it and instead begin to listen, you discover that what you called flaws were simply unloved truths waiting for acceptance. Healing, then, is not about becoming more perfect. It's about becoming more real. So ask yourself, as you stand on that endless staircase of becoming, who are you doing this for? And what if the version of you you're trying so desperately to fix is the only one that's been trying to save you all along? Have you noticed how society never lets you stop? Even rest has become a performance. You take a break only to document it, breathe only to optimize it, smile only to prove you're doing well. Somewhere along the way, peace became a product sold in scented candles, motivational podcasts, and curated morning routines. You were told that happiness could be built like a business plan, that self-worth could be earned like a paycheck. But in chasing that illusion, you forgot how to simply be. You live in a culture that glorifies exhaustion as a badge of honor. Busy has become the new holy word, whispered like a confession that earns respect. You are expected to run, not walk, not pause, run through life as if slowing down means falling behind. Every corner of modern existence hums with the same message: do more, be more, become more. And yet, the more you chase, the more empty you feel. Capitalism turned self-improvement into self-surveillance. You monitor your sleep, your diet, your productivity, your mood, as though you were a machine being tuned for maximum output. Even healing has become a market. You're sold mindfulness apps to quiet a mind that was never designed for constant noise. You're told to love yourself through consumption, to fix your emptiness with the next purchase, the next course, the next transformation. But the more you consume, the further you drift from the simplicity that made life meaningful in the first place. Philosophers once spoke of mastery over the self. The Stoics called it ataraxia, a state of inner calm untouched by external chaos. But the modern world has inverted it. You are now taught to seek control over everything outside yourself, your image, your success, your relevance, while your inner world quietly decays from neglect. Society rewards the mask, not the mind. The result is a generation that appears connected but feels utterly alone. Psychologists call it learned busyness, the compulsive need to stay occupied to avoid confronting one's own thoughts. The human brain, overstimulated and under-rested, begins to associate stillness with danger. That's why silence feels unbearable, why idleness feels like failure. You've been programmed to fear your own peace, to mistrust your quiet, to fill every gap with noise, so you never have to hear the truth whispering underneath it. We live in a culture that treats silence as failure and peace as laziness. But beneath the noise, something sacred still waits the say, the faint hum of being, the original rhythm before the world taught you to run. And maybe that's the greatest rebellion left, not to conquer, not to consume, but to sit still long enough to remember who you were before you were told what to become. And yet, this rebellion comes with a cost, because once you hear that silence, you can never go back to the noise again. There's a kind of exhaustion that sleep can't fix. It's not in your body, it's in your mind, in the quiet space between one thought and the next, where the noise never truly stops. You wake up tired, not because you didn't rest, but because rest no longer feels like rest. The moment your eyes open, 1,000 invisible demands pull at you, messages, deadlines, expectations, comparisons. You don't even notice it anymore, the way your chest tightens when you check your phone, or how your breath shortens as you scroll through lives that seem brighter than yours. This is the fatigue of existing in a world that never lets you arrive. You live surrounded by light screens that glow through the night, illuminating faces that look connected but feel alone. You work, you talk, you laugh, but something beneath it all remains untouched, a quiet ache that hums in the background of every accomplishment. Psychology calls it cognitive fatigue, the cost of endless decision-making and constant stimulation. Your nervous system, once designed to survive storms, now struggles to survive the weather of daily life. You're not broken, you're simply overstimulated, your brain trying to make sense of a world that feeds it more than it can digest. Studies show that the human brain wasn't built for this much input, that constant comparison and digital overload reduce empathy, memory, even the ability to feel joy. And yet, you keep reaching for the next notification, like a starving person reaching for crumbs. Because in those few seconds of distraction, you feel something, anything, before the emptiness returns. You tell yourself you're fine, that this is normal, but deep down, you know it isn't. You've learned to mistake survival for peace. It's in the small moments that the truth seeps through the quiet, after a long day when you realize you can't remember what you actually felt, only what you did. The loneliness that creeps in, even when you're surrounded by people. The strange sense that your life is happening to you, not through you. You wonder when you stopped feeling fully alive, when every joy began to feel muted, when every silence began to sound like failure. Neuroscientists call it emotional blunting, the dulling of your inner world as a defense against overwhelm. But philosophers might call it something else, a spiritual amnesia, a forgetting of what it means to simply exist without performing, to feel without explaining, to breathe without rushing toward the next thing. You've become fluent in doing, but illiterate in being. The grieve, the dome, weight you carry, is not made of things, but of thoughts invisible, endless, heavy. You have everything you were told would make you whole, yet you feel nothing at all. Because somewhere along the way, you forgot the simplest, most sacred art of all, you forgot how to be. Healing doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means remembering what was lost, the version of you that existed before the noise, before the performance, before the endless striving to be enough. Somewhere, underneath the layers of control, comparison, and exhaustion, there's still a quiet self, steady, curious, and whole. The path back to it isn't loud or heroic. It begins softly, in silence, with the decision to stop running from your own reflection. You start by reclaiming the most precious resource you've been taught to give away your attention. In a world designed to scatter it, learning to focus is an act of rebellion. When you sit without your phone, without stimulation, you begin to feel the tremors of your own unease. The mind fidgets, the body resists, but something subtle starts to shift. Neuroscience calls this neural recalibration, the brain rewiring itself to find balance after overstimulation. What was once unbearable, silence becomes sanctuary. Your thoughts no longer chase meaning, they begin to reveal it. Your nervous system, too, learns to breathe again. The shallow, hurried inhale of survival slowly gives way to a deeper rhythm, the kind of breath that anchors you in the present moment. Psychologists call this regulation, the foundation of mental health and clarity. When your body feels safe, the mind follows. You realize that calm is not the absence of movement, but the mastery of it. the ability to stand in chaos without becoming part of it. Over time, self-observation replaces self-judgment. You stop trying to fix every flaw and begin to understand its origin. The achiever in you, the one who hustles for worth, begins to soften. You see that intelligence isn't about accumulation, it's about awareness. That happiness isn't a destination, it's the natural byproduct of attention returning home. And that health, in its truest sense, begins when the body and mind stop competing and start listening to each other. This alignment doesn't look glamorous. It's quiet, patient, and deeply human. It's choosing presence over productivity, curiosity over control, being over becoming. As the clutter fades, what remains isn't a new identity, it's truth. You remember how to eat when hungry, rest when tired, cry when grieving, love without performance. You begin to move not from ambition, but from integrity, from the still point within that no longer needs to prove its existence. And perhaps that's the beginning of real evolution, not a grand ascent toward perfection, but a gentle return to harmony. To be aligned is not to rise above the human experience, but to live it fully with both feet in, the present, both hands unclenched, and both eyes finally open. Because the moment you stop running from yourself, you discover something astonishing. You were never lost. You were only waiting to be found. It's strange, isn't it? How you spend a lifetime trying to build a life worth living, only to realize that the pieces you were searching for were never outside you. Every pursuit of happiness, of health, of intelligence was a circle that always led back home. You thought you were climbing a mountain, but in truth, you were only walking in loops around yourself. The real summit was stillness. The real treasure was the space between one breath and the next. There's a moment that arrives quietly, not with thunder or revelation, but with the softness of rain against glass. You realize that happiness, health, and intelligence were never separate pursuits. They were different names for the same thing: harmony. The mind that thinks clearly, the heart that feels fully, and the body that rests in safety are not three goals but one movement. And that movement is simplicity, the return to being unburdened, unproven, unafraid. Philosopher Epictetus once said, "We suffer not from the things themselves, but from the opinions we have about them." For most of your life, you've been chasing meaning through control, trying to fix what was never broken, trying to perfect what was already enough. You mistook noise for significance and complexity for wisdom. But wisdom, as Alan Watts once wrote, is the ability to stop trying to control the ocean and learn to surf it. The more you tried to master life, the more it slipped through your fingers. Only when you surrendered did it begin to make sense. The great psychologist Carl Jung believed that the point of life was not perfection, but wholeness. That to be whole, you must accept the shadow, the confusion, the grief, the imperfection as part of the same sacred design. You were never meant to shine constantly. You were meant to flicker, to rest, to renew, the same way nature does, the same way rain nourishes the soil it once flooded. And maybe that's what intelligence really is, not a collection of knowledge, but the humility to see through illusion. The understanding that peace was never hidden, it was simply overshadowed by your need to prove yourself worthy of it. When you finally stop trying to become something, you return to the quiet truth that you already are everything. The world outside may continue to chase louder, faster, endlessly, but inside, you begin to hear something different. A stillness that feels like honesty, a simplicity that feels like home. Because the truly wise are not those who know the most, but those who feel the least need to prove it. And as the screen fades, you are left with only a breath, calm, unhurried, eternal. A reminder that the journey was never about becoming more, but remembering what it means to simply be.